and I never thought I'd trust someone like you," she replied. "But I do."
"Bad. And that scares me a little."
He nodded, understanding the fear and uncertainty. "It scares me too."
But sometimes, the best things in life are the ones we never expect. Though, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a sense of peace and possibility.
In that moment, both of them knew that their lives had changed forever.
They had come together for the sake of a little girl, but in the process, they had discovered something that neither could have anticipated: hope, trust, and the quiet beginnings of love. But as though the road ahead was uncertain, both John and Morningstar felt ready to face it together, with Little Feather as the heart that connected them, and the ranch as the home that nurtured them. The weeks passed quietly on John Carter's ranch, but quiet did not mean uneventful. John, Morningstar, and Little Feather had settled into a new rhythm, each day filled with chores, lessons, and small moments of laughter. Little Feather was thriving, learning about horses, helping in the garden, and practicing her mother's customs. She was happy and safe, and that brought both John and Morningstar a quiet relief. John found himself noticing small details about Morningstar he had missed before. The way she smiled when she watched Little Feather learn, the gentle firmness in her voice when she corrected the girl, the strength in her hands as she lifted a heavy basket of vegetables. He admired her more each day.
And yet, he struggled with his feelings.
It was strange for him to want companionship beyond friendship. He had lived alone for so long that it felt unnatural to feel so drawn to someone, to care for someone as much as he cared for Little Feather. Morningstar, too, felt her emotions stir. She had been wary at first, but John's quiet patience and kindness made her trust him more than she had expected. Cowboy takes in an Apache girl, never imagining that her mother will end up stealing his heart. John Carter had lived alone on a small ranch for many years. The wide open land stretched far into the horizon, dry and dusty in the summer, golden and warm in the fall. He liked it that way. The quiet of the plains suited him. He had always been a man of routine. Wake up at dawn, feed the horses, check the fences, and then spend the day tending to his cattle. Life had never been easy, but it was steady, and steady was enough for him. That morning, the sun rose pale and hazy. A gentle wind blew through the tall grass, carrying the distant sound of crows cawing. John had just finished repairing a fence near the river when he noticed a small figure at the edge of the trees. At first, he thought it was a deer. But as he got closer, he saw it was a little girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old. She was thin, her clothes torn and dirty, and her dark hair fell in loose strands over her face. She looked frightened, her eyes wide and uncertain. John stopped in his tracks, unsure what to do. He had seen many things in his life, storms that flattened barns, wild animals that raided his stock, but never a child wandering alone in the woods. He slowly approached her, keeping his voice soft. "Breath. Hey there, little one. You okay?" The girl flinched and took a step back. She didn't answer, only shaking slightly as if afraid he might harm her. John crouched down, keeping his distance, showing he meant no threat. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I'm John." "What's your name?" For a moment, she stayed silent. Her eyes, dark and cautious, studied him, measuring whether his words were true. Then, in a small, hesitant voice, she whispered, "Little Feather." John nodded gently. "Little Feather, all right. Bet."
You must be hungry. Come on, I'll give you something to eat.
Bay. Little Feather's lips pressed together tightly. She didn't move. Unrealized, she had been alone for a long time. And she didn't trust easily. He didn't push. Instead, he pulled out a small loaf of bread from his bag and set it on a flat rock nearby. "You don't have to come closer if you don't want to," he said.
"Just eat if you're hungry." She hesitated but eventually stepped forward, her small hands shaking as she picked up the bread. She ate slowly, nibbling as though every bite was precious.
Ache. John watched her quietly, feeling a tug in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Loneliness had been his companion for so long, and yet now, seeing this fragile little girl surviving on her own, he felt a deep need to protect her. "Bay." After she finished, John offered his hand, still cautious. "Come with me."
You can stay at my place. It's not far from here, and you'll be safe.
Little Feather looked at him, uncertainty in her eyes. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she placed her tiny hand in his. John smiled gently, careful not to frighten her. He led her across the field, the tall grass brushing against their legs, the sun warming the backs of their shoulders. The ranch was simple but sturdy. A small house made of weathered wood stood near a barn, and a few horses grazed nearby. John opened the door and gestured for her to come in. "This is home for now," he said softly. "You can rest, eat, and get cleaned up." Little Feather looked around nervously. Everything was so different from the forest. The smell of wood, the warm light from the windows, the quiet hum of life. It was safe, but unfamiliar. John noticed her hesitation and knelt down to meet her eyes. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you." She nodded slowly, as if testing his words. John helped her to a small basin of water, showing her how to wash her face and hands. She shivered at the cold, but did as he instructed. Once she was a little cleaner, he gave her some warm porridge in a small bowl. Yes, she ate hungrily this time, and John felt a small sense of relief seeing her comforted, even for a little while. As the day went on, John and Little Feather grew a little more comfortable with each other. He told her about his ranch, the horses, and the cattle. She listened quietly, occasionally asking questions about the animals. John had never been much of a talker, but with her, he found himself explaining things he had long taken for granted. It was strange, he realized how quickly a little presence could fill the empty spaces in his life. Evening came, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. John prepared a simple dinner, and Little Feather helped in small ways, carrying vegetables and stirring the pot under his guidance. It was the first time he had shared a meal with anyone in years, and it felt right. The quiet companionship, the small smiles, the shared work, it reminded him of a family he never had. That night, he set up a small bed for Little Feather near the fireplace. She hesitated at first, but eventually climbed in, curling under a warm blanket. John watched her for a moment, her small chest rising and falling with each breath, and he felt a protective warmth he had never known before. As he tended to the horses outside, John thought about what had brought her to him. Was she lost? Had she run from danger? The questions weighed on him, but he knew one thing for certain. She was his responsibility now, and somehow he knew he would not fail her. Little Feather slept fitfully that night, haunted by memories of being alone. But for the first time she felt safe enough to let her eyes close completely. John, sitting outside under the stars, felt a strange sense of purpose. His life had always been simple and solitary, but now it had changed. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a promise that their lives were about to intertwine in ways neither of them could yet understand. The next morning, the routine of the ranch began again. John fed the horses, repaired the fences, and checked on Little Feather. She was awake early, watching him quietly, her eyes curious. He smiled and handed her a small brush to help groom one of the horses. She followed his instructions carefully, and he couldn't help but chuckle at her concentration. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. Days turned into weeks. Little Feather adapted to life on the ranch slowly but surely. She learned to help with the chores, feed the animals, and even ride a horse under John's careful guidance. In return, John learned to pay attention to her small habits, her quiet expressions, and the way she looked at the world. Their bond grew, silent and steady, like the river flowing near the ranch. Then, one afternoon, as John was repairing the barn roof, he heard a distant sound. A woman's voice calling out. He stopped, listening carefully. The voice was soft, but it carried urgency and worry. He frowned, unsure what to make of it. Little Feather ran toward the sound, her eyes wide with recognition and fear. She froze when she saw the figure approaching. It was a woman, tall, strong, with eyes that mirrored Little Feather's own dark gaze. Her presence was commanding yet filled with worry. John's heart skipped a beat. He had known this day might come, but he hadn't expected it so soon. The woman stopped at the edge of the ranch, her eyes scanning John and Little Feather. "Little Feather," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "My daughter, where have you been?"
The woman held her close, relief washing over her face. John watched quietly, unsure of what his role should be.
He felt a strange mix of emotions, relief for the reunion, sadness that his time with Little Feather might end, and something deeper he didn't yet understand. The woman finally looked up at him. Her eyes, dark and steady, met his. "Thank you," she said simply. "You've kept her safe." John nodded, tipping his hat. "She's a brave girl," he said softly.
And she's lucky to have you back. But even as he spoke, he realized that life on the ranch would never be the same again. The arrival of her mother had brought new emotions, new possibilities, and a future he hadn't imagined.
That night, John sat by the fire, thinking about the day's events. He had saved a little girl, yes, but in the process, he had met someone who stirred feelings he had long buried. The quiet of the plains seemed to hum around him, carrying the promise of change, of new beginnings, and perhaps of a heart that could love again. Little Feather slept soundly in her mother's arms that night, and John watched from the doorway.
He knew that this was only the beginning, and whatever came next, his life and his heart would never be the same again.
Morningstar had been searching for her daughter for days, moving quietly through the plains and forests, asking strangers if they had seen a young girl with dark hair and cautious eyes. When she finally arrived at John Carter's ranch, her heart pounded with a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that Little Feather was safe, and fear of the unknown man who had taken her in. Best. She had been taught to be careful, to trust no one easily, and yet she also knew how desperate she had become to find her child. John met her at the edge of the ranch, tipping his hat politely. He could sense her strength immediately. There was a confidence in her stance, a way she held herself as though she could face any danger. Yet beneath it, John saw a softness, a deep love for her daughter that mirrored his own feelings for the little girl. He stepped forward slowly, giving her space while showing he meant no harm.
Morningstar, he said quietly, offering the name he had learned from Little Feather. She's safe here.
I've been taking care of her. Her eyes scanned him carefully. She did not relax immediately, but the warmth in his tone and the gentle way he had treated her daughter made her hesitate before speaking.
"Thank you,"
she said softly, almost reverently. I feared the worst." Little Feather clung to her mother, her small arms wrapped tightly around Morningstar's waist. Morningstar hugged her daughter back, feeling the fear and exhaustion leave her in the safety of her mother's arms. She looked at John again, this time with more curiosity than caution. "I see she has been well fed and cared for," she said. "You have done her good."
John nodded, scratching the back of his neck. He had not expected to meet her, and now, standing in front of her, he felt something stir in his chest he could not name.
He had been alone for so long, his life simple and predictable, but Morningstar's presence introduced a new, complicated feeling, one that made his heart beat faster and his hands tense. Over the next few days, Morningstar stayed at the ranch. She insisted on helping with Little Feather's care and learning about the ranch. John found himself observing her from a distance at first, unsure how to speak to someone so strong yet so gentle. She moved with purpose, cleaning and cooking, guiding Little Feather, and teaching her about their own customs. John watched as she braided Little Feather's hair, whispering soft words he could not understand, and he felt a strange warmth at seeing the bond between mother and daughter. Little Feather seemed happier than she had in weeks. She laughed more, spoke more, and began to trust John even more deeply, knowing that her mother was here, safe and supported. Morningstar was careful not to overstep, but she could not hide her admiration for John. He was patient with Little Feather, teaching her about the horses, showing her how to tend to the cows, and even reading stories aloud at night by the fire. She noticed his quiet strength, the way he moved through the ranch with ease and confidence. She admired his kindness, his honesty, and the way he looked at her daughter not as a burden, but as someone precious to protect.
One afternoon, while John was repairing a section of fence near the barn, Morningstar approached him.
The sun was warm on their backs, and the soft hum of insects filled the air. She spoke cautiously, unsure how to begin. "You care for her deeply," she said. John paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I do," he admitted simply. "She needed help, and I felt I had to give it." Morningstar looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I can see that. She trusts you more than anyone else has." Breaths. "And I am grateful for that." John nodded, unsure what else to say. He had never been good at expressing his feelings, especially to women who commanded respect and exuded strength like Morningstar did best. Yet, standing there in the warm afternoon light, he felt a connection forming, something he could not ignore. As the days passed, their interactions became more natural. They worked together to prepare meals, fix fences, and tend to the animals. Morningstar showed John how to make traditional meals for Little Feather, and he, in turn, taught her simple cowboy skills. There was a quiet rhythm to their days, filled with small gestures of care and understanding. They laughed together occasionally, shared stories of their pasts, and began to rely on each other in subtle ways. But with growing closeness came unease. Morningstar worried about what the world would think if she allowed herself to grow fond of John. He was a settler, and she was Apache. History and prejudice weighed heavily on her mind. John, on the other hand, struggled with his own pride and the unfamiliar feelings stirring in his heart. He had never imagined himself falling for someone like Morningstar. Strong, proud, and independent. But now he could not deny the pull he felt toward her. One evening after dinner, they found themselves sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The air was cool, and Little Feather was asleep inside. Neither spoke at first, letting the quiet settle over them. Then Morningstar broke the silence.
Oh.
You have a good heart, she said softly. I can see it in the way you care for her. And in the way you have treated me. John looked at her, his gaze steady. I have always believed in helping those in need, he said. But I didn't expect to feel this way.
About you! Morningstar's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath.
She had felt it too, the unspoken bond, the growing affection, but had not dared to name it. John, we must be careful, she said gently. This, us, it cannot be simple. Bed. He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I know, but I cannot ignore it either. The next day, they continued their work, but there was a subtle change in how they moved around each other. A glance lingered longer, a hand brushed by accident, and smiles appeared more often. Little Feather noticed it too, though she did not understand it fully. She just felt the warmth of the two people she loved most in the world, her father figure and her mother, coming closer together. Their routine was interrupted one afternoon by news from the nearby town. A neighboring rancher had been in a dispute over land, and there were whispers that trouble might spill over. John and Morningstar worked side by side, tending to the cattle and preparing the ranch for any potential threats. Bess. In those moments of shared labor, their trust and reliance on each other deepened. They spoke less and worked more, but every glance and shared gesture carried unspoken meaning. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between John and Morningstar grew stronger. They began to share small stories from their pasts. Stories of loss, of hardship, of moments that shaped who they had become. John spoke of his parents, who had passed when he was young, leaving him to manage the ranch alone. Morningstar shared memories of her family, her childhood among her people, and the struggles she had faced as a mother protecting her child. Each story brought them closer, each revelation a bridge between their worlds. Even at night, when the work was done and the ranch was quiet, they found ways to connect. Sometimes it was through conversation by the fire, other times through shared tasks like mending clothes or preparing meals. There was no rush, no pressure, just the steady growth of trust and understanding. And with trust came the subtle beginnings of love, something neither of them had expected but both could no longer deny. Little Feather thrived in this environment. She laughed more, asked questions, and began to learn both her mother's traditions and the ways of the ranch. She saw the unspoken bond between John and Morningstar and, in her own innocent way, felt the safety and love that surrounded her. She was no longer a frightened girl alone in the world. She was part of a family, however unconventional it might seem. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, John and Morningstar found themselves sitting quietly on the porch again. Little Feather was asleep inside, exhausted from a day full of laughter and learning. John broke the silence this time. I never thought I'd meet someone like you, he said quietly. Someone who makes me feel alive again. Morningstar looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light, the warmth in his eyes, the way he gently guided her daughter, the protective stance he took when danger seemed near. These things began to tug at her heart. She had always been independent, relying only on herself, but she could not deny the connection she felt with John. She wondered if it was acceptable to feel affection for a man from outside her world. One morning, the calm of the ranch was broken by the arrival of neighbors. They had heard rumors of an Apache woman living with a settler and were curious, some perhaps suspicious. A few men approached the fence, looking over cautiously, trying to hide their surprise at seeing Morningstar. John noticed them immediately and walked toward the fence, his tall frame blocking their view of Morningstar and Little Feather.
Can I help you? John asked, firmly but calmly.
One of the men, older and stern, stepped forward. "We heard a story about an Apache woman and her daughter staying here. Thought we should see if it's true." John didn't flinch. Bad. "It's true. They're my guests." "Is there a problem?" The man hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Well, it's unusual, that's all." "People talk, you understand." John's jaw tightened. "I understand. But no one here is causing trouble. They're under my protection. If anyone has a problem with that, they can speak to me directly." The men muttered something under their breath, but finally left. Morningstar watched John with quiet admiration. She had expected judgment, maybe even hostility, but he had handled it with calm authority. She realized that he was not only strong in body, but also in character, a man who could face challenges without fear. That afternoon, they returned to their work. Little Feather ran to help gather hay for the animals, while John and Morningstar repaired a broken section of the barn roof together. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds being the creak of wood and the soft laughter of Little Feather. Then John spoke quietly. "You handled them well," he said, not looking at her directly. "Becked. I could not have done it without you." She hesitated, then added softly, "You protect us, John. Not just Little Feather, but me too." Bay. John felt a rush of warmth and a slight embarrassment. "I do what's right," he said simply. But he did not deny the unspoken truth. He also felt something more for her, a feeling he could not name fully yet.
Over the next few days, life settled into a comfortable, if tense, rhythm.
They worked, laughed, and shared small meals together. Little Feather began practicing riding the horses more confidently, often under John's watchful eye while Morningstar cheered her on. During those moments, John noticed how natural it felt to have Morningstar nearby, how easily they worked together, and how protective he had become, not only of Little Feather, but of Morningstar herself. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Morningstar and John found themselves sitting on the porch steps, Little Feather asleep inside. The air was warm, and the soft wind carried the scent of the prairie.
"You think about her a lot, don't you?" Morningstar said, nodding toward Little Feather's room. John smiled faintly.
"Every day," he admitted. She's brave and smart."
And I feel responsible for her. I can't help it.
Morningstar reached out briefly, touching his hand.
The contact was light, but it sent a warmth through both of them. "She's lucky to have you," she said softly. "And I'm learning to trust you more each day." John looked into her eyes, feeling something stir deep inside.
"I never expected to care for anyone like this," he admitted.
"But I do. Not just for her, but for you too, Bration." Morningstar's eyes widened slightly, and she looked down, unsure how to respond. She had felt it too, the growing connection, but acknowledging it was frightening. "Bay, John, we must be careful," she said. "There are things, people, that might not understand us, Bay, that might judge us."
"I know," John replied, squeezing her hand gently. "But I can't ignore it."
Best, and I don't want to. For the first time, they allowed themselves to sit in the quiet understanding that something important was growing between them, something neither of them had expected yet could no longer deny. But life on the ranch was not without its challenges. One afternoon, a storm swept across the plains, strong winds and heavy rain threatening the animals and the crops.
John and Morningstar worked tirelessly together to secure the barn, shelter the animals, and make sure Little Feather was safe inside. They moved side by side, coordinating effortlessly, their bond strengthened by the shared labor and urgency. After the storm passed, the ranch was damaged, but intact. They sat together on the porch once more, exhausted, but relieved.
Morningstar looked at John, her voice quiet but full of emotion.
We make a good team.
She said. John nodded, feeling the truth in her words. We do, he said. And we always will. That night, as they sat by the fire inside, Little Feather sleeping peacefully, John and Morningstar spoke quietly about their hopes for the future. They shared stories of their pasts, of families lost and hardships endured. The walls they had built around their hearts began to crumble, replaced by trust, respect, and the faint stirrings of love. By the end of Part 3, it was clear that John and Morningstar's connection was no longer a simple matter of convenience or duty. Despair. It was something deeper. A bond that was slowly turning into love, even as challenges both from the world outside and from their own fears loomed on the horizon. The days following the storm brought a sense of calm, but life on the ranch always held its share of challenges. Crops needed tending, animals required care, and the constant labor left little time for rest. Yet, for John and Morningstar, the routine brought them closer. They worked side by side, learning to anticipate each other's movements, understanding each other without words. Even in the quiet moments, there was a growing awareness of something stronger between them, a feeling neither could ignore. Little Feather thrived under their combined care. She learned quickly, her laughter filling the ranch with a new warmth. She asked questions about the land, the animals, and her mother's traditions. Morningstar patiently explained, often letting Little Feather practice, while John guided her with gentle corrections. The girl's happiness was a reflection of the growing harmony between the two adults. One morning, John decided to teach Little Feather how to ride a horse alone. Bah! He chose a calm, steady mare named Daisy and guided the girl through mounting and balancing. Morningstar watched from the fence, her eyes bright with encouragement. You can do it, Little Feather, she called, her voice soft but firm. Little Feather wobbled slightly as she mounted the horse, and John held the reins to steady her. You're doing fine, he said encouragingly. Just trust the horse and trust yourself. Morningstar's gaze lingered on John, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had grown to respect him deeply, not just for his skill and patience, but for the kindness and dedication he showed toward her daughter. She realized that her admiration had begun to transform into something more profound, something she had not expected to feel. As the days passed, John and Morningstar found themselves sharing small moments of intimacy, unspoken and gentle. A hand brushing by accident while carrying water, a glance lingering a moment too long, a smile that held more than mere politeness. Each moment built upon the last, creating a foundation of trust and understanding. However, tension occasionally surfaced. Some neighbors whispered behind their backs, casting suspicious glances at the unusual family. John remained calm and steadfast, protecting Morningstar and Little Feather without confrontation, but Morningstar felt the weight of these judgments. She feared that their growing bond would be challenged not just by prejudice, but by the expectations of both her world and John's. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, John and Morningstar sat quietly on the porch. Little Feather was asleep inside, exhausted from the day's lessons and play. John broke the silence. We've grown close, he said quietly. Closer than I expected. And I can't ignore what I feel for you. Morningstar looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light.
I feel it too, she admitted softly. But I am afraid.
Afraid of what people will think, and afraid of losing what we have already built for Little Feather. John reached for her hand, holding it gently. We don't have to face the world all at once, he said. We can take it slowly. But I want you to know, my feelings are real. Tears welled in Morningstar's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of connection. Base. I trust you, John, she whispered. And I want to try. For Little Feather, and for us. The two sat in silence, letting the weight of their words settle. The ranch, the animals, the quiet plains, they were no longer just a home or a livelihood. They had become a place of healing, of hope, and of love. In the days that followed, their bond deepened. They learned to communicate without words, anticipating each other's needs, supporting one another through small hardships, and celebrating victories, no matter how minor. Little Feather thrived in this environment, her laughter and curiosity a constant reminder of why they were willing to take these risks with their hearts. By the end of Part 4, John and Morningstar had acknowledged their feelings and taken the first steps toward a shared life, even as challenges, external and internal, remained. Psst. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time they allowed themselves to imagine a future together, built on trust, respect, and the quiet power of love. The days on John Carter's ranch had grown warmer with the arrival of spring. The plains were alive with soft green grass, wildflowers, and the gentle hum of nature. The sun shone longer into the evening, and the animals thrived in the renewed warmth. For John, Morningstar, and Little Feather, these days felt like a gift, a time of peace after months of worry, fear, and uncertainty. Little Feather ran through the fields, laughing freely as she chased a butterfly, her mother following behind with a smile. Bang! John watched from a distance, leaning against the fence, a quiet smile on his face. Seeing Morningstar and Little Feather together, seeing their bond so strong, filled him with a sense of belonging he had never known before. His life had changed completely since the day he had found Little Feather alone near the river, and he could not imagine going back to the quiet loneliness he had once accepted. Morningstar had grown comfortable in the ranch life, learning the routines and skills necessary to maintain it. She tended the garden, helped with the animals, and taught Little Feather about her people's customs. But more than anything, she had grown close to John. Each day, their partnership became stronger, not just in work, but in life. Small gestures, a hand held while walking across the field, a glance shared across the barn, a quiet word in the evening spoke volumes about the feelings growing between them. One afternoon, as John and Morningstar repaired the fence along the northern boundary of the ranch, Little Feather ran ahead to check on the horses grazing near the river. John handed Morningstar a hammer and a few nails, watching her work with careful attention. You've gotten really good at this, he said. I think you could take on the whole fence by yourself someday. Morningstar laughed softly. Maybe someday, she replied. But I like working with you. John paused for a moment, looking at her with a mixture of admiration and longing. I like working with you too, he admitted quietly. And I want more than that. Becht, I want you to stay here, with me, with Little Feather, for as long as you will. Morningstar's eyes softened, and she lowered the hammer. I want that too, she whispered. I've been afraid of what people might think, afraid of stepping outside the life I've known. But with you, it feels right, safe, and full of hope. John smiled, his heart swelling. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. We'll face whatever comes together, he said. Bah.
No matter what anyone else thinks,
Little Feather, hearing their voices, ran back toward them, her face bright with excitement. Mama!
Papa John! Look! Daisy can jump over the log all by herself! John knelt down to meet her eyes. That's amazing, Little Feather, he exclaimed. You and Daisy make a great team. Morningstar lifted the girl into her arms, holding her close. You've grown so strong and brave, she said.
Petition.
I'm proud of you. The three of them stood together, a small family bound not by blood but by love, trust, and shared experience.
It was a moment of quiet joy, one they would remember forever. As the days passed, John and Morningstar began to discuss their future more openly. They talked about expanding the ranch, planting more crops, and raising the animals together. They also spoke of integrating Morningstar's heritage into their life, teaching Little Feather the traditions of her people, celebrating their customs and honoring the past while building a new life together. But life was not without its small challenges. Occasionally, neighbors would comment on their unusual family, or a misunderstanding would arise about property boundaries.
John handled these situations with calm authority, and Morningstar offered wisdom and patience.
Together, they presented a united front, showing the community that their bond was built on respect, care, and responsibility. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was painted in deep shades of red and gold, and the air was filled with the quiet sounds of the plains. John took Morningstar's hand gently in his own, his voice soft but steady. I've lived alone for a long time, he said. I thought I could be happy that way. But now I know happiness is better when it's shared. With you, with Little Feather, with family. Morningstar rested her head lightly against his shoulder. I feel the same, she whispered.
I've been strong and independent all my life, but strength isn't just about standing alone. It's about knowing when to lean on someone you trust.
I trust you, John. Their hands tightened together, the silence between them filled with understanding and unspoken promises. They did not need grand words. Their actions, their presence, and the life they had built together said everything. Little Feather, sensing the quiet connection between the adults, quietly slipped her hand into John's other hand, holding them together as a family. She giggled softly. Bear.
We're a team, she said, her voice full of certainty. Yes, we are, John said, smiling down at her.
Bess. The best team. As the weeks turned into months, the ranch thrived under their care. Crops grew tall and strong, the animals were healthy, and the little house became warm with laughter and love. John and Morningstar's relationship deepened naturally, their trust and affection growing stronger with each passing day. They faced difficulties together, but each challenge only strengthened their bond. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, painting the horizon in soft gold, John and Morningstar stood together, looking out at the land they loved. Little Feather ran ahead to chase the morning birds, her laughter echoing across the fields. Bear.
John wrapped an arm around Morningstar's shoulders.
I never imagined this life, he said softly.
I thought I'd always be alone, but now I can't imagine life without you or Little Feather.
Bed. Morningstar leaned into him, her hand resting on his chest. We've built something beautiful here, she replied. A life filled with love, safety, and hope. And it's just the beginning. Psst. They walked hand in hand toward the barn, watching Little Feather play, the warmth of the sun on their backs. They spoke little, for words were unnecessary. Their hearts were full, their family whole, and their lives intertwined in a way that felt natural, enduring, and unbreakable. Whispers of disapproval were replaced by admiration for the family that had thrived despite challenges. Their neighbors saw the love, the care, and the hard work that went into building the ranch and the family.
Slowly, respect replaced doubt, and the unusual trio was accepted, not just tolerated.
As the evening fell, the three of them gathered in the living room. Little Feather rested in Morningstar's lap while John sat close holding both of them. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with warmth and light. John looked at Morningstar, his eyes full of gratitude and love.
"Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me. For being here. For letting me be part of your lives."
Morningstar smiled, her hand gently caressing his cheek. "Thank you," she replied. "But for protecting us, for loving us, and for showing me that family can be found in unexpected places."
Little Feather yawned and nestled closer to her mother.
"I love you both," she whispered. John kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "We love you too, Little Feather. Always." Outside, the stars began to appear, one by one shining brightly over the plains. The ranch, the family, and the land were quiet, peaceful, and full of promise. John, Morningstar, and Little Feather sat together, the soft glow of the fire reflecting their smiles. They were not just surviving, they were thriving, building a life of love, trust, and happiness. And as the night deepened, John realized that the little girl he had found near the river had brought him more than joy and purpose. She had brought him love, family, and a life richer than he had ever imagined. Morningstar, the strong, proud woman he had grown to love, had captured his heart in ways he could never have predicted. Together, they faced the future as a family, bound by choice, love, and the quiet power of trust. Their journey had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it had grown into something beautiful. The plain stretched wide around them, full of possibility, and in the warmth of the firelight, John, Morningstar, and Little Feather found what they had all been searching for: a home, a family, and hearts that were no longer alone.